I was just a hair late getting in this morning. I was out front talking about preseason football. And it's one of those times where you have a lot of people who have a dream that is about to be shattered, unfortunately. For those who don't know, this time of year, every NFL roster has 90 players on it. In less than a month, there will be 53. People who have been the best in their college are finding out they're not the best. Dreams that they thought, this is what I'm going to be doing for my future, are about to come to an end. Something else will have to begin. And I don't say that to be a downer, because I do think, and a lot of what today is going to be about is, well, what is the life that we're supposed to live? Now, sometimes that's not what we think it is. Sometimes that means that we have to change. Sometimes that means that, we have to repent. And to repent means to turn. But sometimes it also means having the courage to invest in that dream that you think you want to have, that life that you think you want to have. If you say, I want to write a book, you don't write a book by sitting down and all of a sudden everything in your mind magically goes from your mind onto the screen, and then it goes from the screen to the publisher, and it goes from the publisher to the New York Times bestseller list without you having to do any work. First have to type the first word and the second word and 100,000 words after that, and go through all the editing process, and then maybe, just maybe, it'll get published. If you want to run a marathon, you aren't going to run a marathon without getting sweaty. And you're not going to run a marathon by just saying, hey, I'm going to run the Boston Marathon and show up on the day of the Boston Marathon and try to go 26.2 miles. Now, somebody may try that. One, they're not going to let you be a part of the Boston Marathon. You have to qualify for that first. But two, even if you go the 26.2 miles, by the end of it, your legs are going to go like this, because they're not going to move anymore. The reality is, if you're actually going to do this, you're going to have to actually buy running shoes. You're actually going to have to go and put them on and lace them up and go out in the morning. And, probably your first run, if you're not a runner, is not going to be that far. But you build up a little after a little after a little. You begin to put your actions where you want to be. You begin to live into that. So I could go around the room with all kinds of different hobbies. But I'm going to guess, for example, for the golfers in the room, that you've put a lot of money into golf clubs and times at the course. Or for the fishers, the people who go out and fish in the room, you put a lot of money into your rods and your reels and your tackle box and perhaps your boat. Or whatever your hobby happens to be. And there are no things that we really give our hearts to, even if the cost is not monetary. There is a cost. There's something that we put into. There's something that we invest into it. It's our time. It's our resources. It's who we are. So if you are a writer, for example, well, you're not only just writing, you're also reading, because you don't just write from what's in your mind, because you need to be exposed to what other people are writing, what other people are saying, other stories. Carissa and I, last fall, we went out to the East Coast for one of our friends' weddings. And while we were there, we spent a couple days in New York City. And one of the places we visited in New York City was a place where people were trying to live into their dreams. So there's a place on Broadway called Ella's Stardust Diner. And the waiters will get up and they will sing for you during your meal. But all these waiters are hoping to make it onto Broadway. And so the money that they're making there are going into acting lessons, and dancing lessons, singing lessons, these things that they need to do, these talents they need to have so that they maybe, just maybe, have a chance to make it where the lights are bright on Broadway. And I remember when we were sitting there, there was a person who had come in, and she wasn't one of the waiters. She was just there, but it was almost like you could see in her eyes, I want to be where they are because they're on the way to where they want to be. And it was one of these things of, okay, how do I take this first step? How do I make this first piece of this? I mean, and I think sometimes that dream is something that, hey, you throw yourself into and you give everything you can to it. And sometimes, for no apparent reason, it works, and sometimes for no apparent reason, it doesn't. You know, there are times where our dreams have to change. There are times where the life that we thought we were going to live is not the life we're going to live. I'm sure I've told this story before. When I was in middle school and when I was in high school, I knew what I was going to be. I knew exactly what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I was going to fly. You know, I grew up in the age of Top Gun. I wanted to be the one, you know, whether off the carrier. And so the two best ways to do that were to go to the Air Force Academy or go to the Naval Academy. So my senior year of high school, I had the appointment to the Naval Academy. I'd passed the physical part, or the physical fitness part of it. And all I had to go through was the physical exam. I had all the pieces in place. It looked like this was going to happen. I go through the physical exam and everything's right except color vision. So I didn't realize it at the time. I don't see green yellow the way everybody else sees green yellow. I'm green yellow color deficient. So I can point out green and I can point out yellow, but that it takes more of the pixel for my eyes to catch and say this is green than yellow. And when you're flying a plane, that's kind of a big deal. Because if you're coming in and there's a light in the distance that's green or yellow or red, you need to be able to tell if it's green or yellow or red because it says you're high or you're low or you're on flight path. And so that was an automatic disqualification, not only from flying, but from the Naval Academy. Or from the Navy, period, for that matter. And so it was one of these things, the dream had to change. The path had to change. Now, does that mean that my life ended there at that moment? No. My life, the path I went on changed. Things opened up that were closed before and things closed that were opened up before. There are times where our dreams may have to change. There are times where you go and you go to Broadway and you reach a point where you say, this is not going to come to be, or you go to Nashville to be a singer and you realize, okay, there's a lot of people here and there are an awful lot of really good people here. And, you know, back in my hometown, I was right on top of the world, but here I'm maybe middle of the road. And sometimes, you know, sometimes life gets in the way. Sometimes life says, you know what? You've got other people who you're invested in now. You've got whether a family or kids or you've got a job. And, you know, I think sometimes we hold on to a dream that's no longer a good dream anymore. I see this happen a lot sometimes in when I'm working with people. And, you know, there's not that they're holding on to reality. They're holding on to a dream of what reality could have been. You know, I wanted this, and it's not making me happy anymore. But this is what I wanted back then, and I keep pushing and pulling towards it, even though I don't love it anymore. So sometimes there are those times where you have to let it go. And I say all this as kind of a prelude into, well, what's the life that God called? And how do we begin to live into that? How do we begin to live into the life that God calls us into? And I think that, you know, we can say, hey, I don't know enough. I don't understand enough. I don't, hey, when I know it, when I understand things fully, then I'll start living that life. But we know enough. We know enough of what God knows. we know enough of, yeah, I'll be the first to admit, I don't understand all of what God intends for life, but I know enough to begin to live into it. And I know that we know enough to live into it. We talk about coming together and worshiping weekly and praying daily, and those are all important parts of how we build our relationship with God. And really, all the marks of discipleship that we have are ways in which we try to build that relationship with God. I'll tell you a little secret, though. I bet that if I was to open your account balance from your bank, I could tell you where your values are. They may not be the values you want to have, but they would be the values you have. A lot of us don't write checks anymore. I'm old-fashioned. I still do. A lot of us don't write checks anymore, but the checks we write, some of them we don't have any control over. Some of them we do. But they do tell us where our values are. They do tell us what we invest in. They do tell us where we put our heart. In the gospel, we often hear incorrectly, put your hearts where you want your treasure. That's not what it says. Where your treasures are, that's where your heart will. We don't become the people who we want to be by just having our hearts in the right place. We become the people who we want to be, who we're called to be, by acting, by beginning to live the life even when we don't feel it. And one of the things that is, I think, so hard and so strange that the church does in our culture, at least the culture around it, is that we give to God and our neighbors. We say about our possessions, in a world that says you will never have enough, we say we have enough, and I'm going to let go of some of it. I'm going to give to God a portion of what I have. I want to be in that place where I fear, love, and trust God above all things, and so I'm going to start practicing that. I'm going to start a little at a time, saying, you know what? This is the kind of life I want to live. I want to live a life where I can be appreciative of that which I have, not always longing for that which is out there beyond. I want to live a life where I can trust that God provides me today. This is my daily bread. God gives me enough. I want to be in that place where I can trust God. And to do that, that means I need to let go of the things that I trust myself. I think this act is so hard for us because our possessions often begin to possess us. We can begin to become controlled by the very things that, we think are going to bring us happiness. And I'm not saying that going out and buying something doesn't bring happiness, but doesn't last. Doesn't mean it's wrong, but I think when we place that in that first place of saying, this is what's going to make me happy, we're setting it up and we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. There's a story attributed to Martin Luther. Again, Luther probably never said this, but, when somebody came up to this imagined Luther and said, well, what would you do if the world was ending tomorrow? Luther supposedly said, I would plant a tree. Now, that's faithful to what Luther would have reacted and probably what he would have said in that situation if somebody in his time would have actually asked that question. And I like that particular little story because you plant a tree not because you think the world's going to end tomorrow. You plant a tree because that's what you would do anyway. That's the kind of life you would want to live. Why would I change my life if God was going to meet me today? Why would I change my life today from the way I've been living before? Do I think that somehow God's fooled by that, or that God doesn't understand that, part of it is, okay, start living the life you want to live now. Start being in that relationship you want to have with God now. Start trusting God now. Not because out of fear, but out of love. I do think that part of it is, when Jesus tells this parable of the servants waiting for the master to return. The master returns and he honors those servants who have been waiting. It's not that they, it's not that they're doing it out of the fear of, hey, my master's going to return and I'm going to be whipped if I not at my post. No, it's because I want my master to see me there. I want to be there when he returns. I want to be the one who opens the door. And, I do believe that God meets us in unexpected times and unexpected places throughout our life. We don't get to set the timetable with God. Okay, God, I would like you to appear tomorrow between 3:30 and 3:45. That's like saying to the cable repair person, show up at 1 o'clock. The reality is God appears at times when we don't expect. It's not that God doesn't appear in the midst of our life. It's just that sometimes God appears at times and in places and in ways in which we don't expect. God often approaches in ways that are honestly surprising, in people who are honestly surprising, and the people who you least expect to encounter God, sometimes that's exactly where God shows up. And I do think that part of what this group of sayings that Jesus has for us today, and this comes right after Jesus talked about not worrying about the things that we have and the things that we eat, the things that we drink. That God takes care of the sparrows of the field and the grass, or the sparrows in the air and the grass of the field. God will take care of us as well. I think part of it is, setting us free to say, okay, well, what is that life that you are called to live? Start living it. You may not be able to live it all at once, but if this is what you're called to live, take that step of faith out there and see that I'm going to be trustworthy. Start living that life now, because you don't know when I will meet you. When are those times in which I will approach you? When are those times where I'll come and I'll set the table for you and I'll let you sit down and eat, let you enjoy? I do think that part of this, part of grace is giving us permission, giving us freedom to live that life that God calls us to live out those gifts that God has placed within you, to take the talents that God has placed in your hands and to invest them in the world, in the life that God has given you. And you may not do it all at once. Again, it may not be one of those things where I wake up this morning and all of a sudden, Boston, here I come. It may not be one of these things where I wake up this morning and say, you know what? Here's the next New York Times bestseller. It may not be one of those things where I wake up this morning and say, here is every little bit and piece of the life I want to live right now, and I think God is calling me to. I may have to begin to be putting my treasures where I want my heart. Now, I'm your pastor. There are times where my heart's not in the right place. Times where I have to live into it. There are times where I have to say, you know what, this is worth struggling for. This is worth working for. This is worth seeking, putting first and putting central. That Jesus can say, seek first the kingdom of God and all that comes with it. And all these other things will be granted to you as well. And I'm as guilty as anybody else in this room of being distracted by all the other things that are out there. All these other things that are good and in their own right, but they can't occupy that place. I want to be in that place where I fear, love, and trust God above all things. And I know that there are lots of times where I'm not there. But I'm trying to live into that. I'm trying to place my life in that place where I want it to be. Yes, I do it by prayer. Yes, I do it by worship. Yes, I do it by relationship. Yes, I also do it by trying to place my treasures where I want my heart. So give, live, trust. Be surprised at the places where God in the midst of this journey. Thanks be to God.